January and February are the coldest months of the year, and there's a good chance that things will freeze. So why in the world am I telling you to start seeds in February? Because we have a very narrow planting window. By the time most of these plants are ready to go into the garden, we will be in hot spring weather. And some of these plants need to produce before our summer rains. So we actually have a very narrow planting window. So let's dive right into these 6 plants to start in February for an abundant Florida garden. Our first crop is one that is often actually confused with what's behind me, which is tomatoes. These 2 crops are completely unrelated and they're in entirely different plant families. One of the crops that I would suggest starting to plant in February is tomatillos, which is also known as a husk tomato. These are commonly used in salsas and Central and Caribbean cooking, and they are absolutely delicious. They thrive in our cool yet heading into warm months when it's nice and dry. So these will thrive in our late winter, early spring growing conditions. Now, tomatillos do not get nearly as big as an indeterminate tomato like I have behind me, but they will need some support. So make sure to put a little cage around it. And one critical factor is that they absolutely need cross-pollination. So make sure you have at least 2 plants, if not more, to get any sort of significant yields. Kale is well loved by gardeners. But in this time where we are going to be sowing things that are going through transitional seasons where we go from cold to hot, variety is key, just like most of the year. When I first delved into heirloom vegetables for Florida, I came across this one, and it is now one of my favorite kales to grow here for its incredible ease and flavor. And that is Ethiopian kale. Now you can see it's planted here in my green stock, but this kale is so well adapted to growing in our area that it is one I had growing in ground with no supplemental water or fertilizer, and it would reseed itself every single year. So I had this patch of Ethiopian kale growing underneath my elderberry bushes that I never had to do anything for. Needless to say, very well adapted to growing in our climate and is a huge top recommendation. Now, Ethiopian kale is rather unique, and it is definitely something that is locally saved here in Florida, but is likely going to be missing from most of your major seed retailers across the country. So if you're looking for some of these more unique varieties that we're going to talk about in this video, make sure to head to my seed shop where I have all of these and more that are well adapted to growing here in our Florida climate. My third pick for seeds to start in February is a flower, not an edible, although you can eat the flowers. My daughter absolutely loves to grow flowers in her garden, and there are numerous benefits to doing so, attracting pollinators and beneficial insects being key, as well as the beauty of a cut vase. But these zinnias here are not my recommendation. Instead, heading into our drier, warmer months of spring, I would highly recommend growing cosmos. They are a little bit more tolerant of that heat and dry growing conditions. There's all sorts of varieties of cosmos, most of which come in beautiful like whites and pinks and purples. But my favorite mix is Sensation Cosmos. It's a beautiful, low-growing flower, and when you densely seed it, it's just magical as it blows in the breeze. So if you are looking for a little bit of beauty, a little bit of edibility, and a happy mix of both, I would highly recommend growing these cosmos. My next pick is something that is a personal favorite of mine and my youngest daughter's. I like to eat them in the pod. A lot of people will shell them. There's lots of different varieties, but my personal favorite is the sugar snap peas. Now they have this in dwarf varieties, which can easily grow in something like a green stock or a container, or they have pole types or tall types that will grow up trellises like a cattle panel out of a raised bed. Now, obviously the production is going to be a little bit higher on the tall varieties, but why not grow something in a vertical garden like this if you can, and save space for stuff that won't grow so well in these for the beds. I really like the sugar snap peas because if you don't want to shell them, you can just eat the pod whole right out of the garden without all the muss and fuss of shelling. I really recommend the sugar snap peas. Most of the crops in today's video will do just fine heading into these warmer months, but the peas in particular are one that I would recommend getting planted as early as possible in February. They do prefer our cooler temperatures, and once the heat gets excessive in April, they will fizzle out. I am surrounded and engulfed by this monstrosity of a plant. Yes, this is one plant. It's a Seminole pumpkin. And while I do heavily favor the winter pumpkins like Seminole pumpkin or Tahitian melon squash, they obviously have a very different taste and flavor from summer squash, which is my next recommendation for planting in February. Now, these do have a narrow window just like the peas. They're kind of the Goldilocks of the plant world. They don't want it too hot, they don't want it too cold. But summer squash is a variety that can be incredibly productive. So if you plant it at the right time of year and are willing to give it a little bit of TLC, you will be rewarded with lots and lots of squash. Now, my small space gardeners might be having a panic attack thinking that all squash plants get this big. Luckily, summer squash, that's not the case. Almost all summer squash, aside from something like tatumi, are going to be a bush, which means they can easily grow in a container, a pot, or a raised bed. So the cocozelle and the costada and yellow crooked neck squash are all great varieties. They are going to be a little bit more powdery mildew resistant and will do well in our Florida spring. I tell people all the time that it is so important for them to pick what they actually love to eat when they're planning out their gardens. Now, here at my homestead with the Urban Harvest, I'm a no spray, low maintenance gardener. So when I have to deal with a needy crop, more often than not, it's probably gonna die, or I'm just not even gonna bother planting it. But with that being said, if cucumbers are your thing and that is what's going to give you the most excitement and reward for growing food, then by all means plant it. Just know that it is one of the more difficult crops to grow here in Florida. With that being said, variety is absolutely essential for cucumbers and all cucurbits, which are cucumbers, melons, and squashes. This variety right here is Suyo cucumber. And as you can see, we have production. I have not treated this thing for pests or fungal issues the entire time it's growing. The one in front of it, however, had the same treatment and is clearly dead as a doorknob. So, as you can see, variety will make a huge difference when you are growing cucumbers in your garden. These are just like the squash family. They want to be that Goldilocks situation, not too hot, not too cold. They don't like the rains of summer or the freezes of winter. So this is a very time-sensitive crop, and February is the time to get it in the ground. Like I said before, cucumbers and squash are some of the most difficult crops to grow here in Florida. You now know the varieties of those to plant, which will set you up for success. But it is very likely that you're still going to have to employ my free and highly effective fungal treatments. And its secret ingredient is likely sitting in your fridge right now. To learn my free DIY fungal treatment, make sure to watch this video next.